Welcome back to the Old West Tales, where every story whispers secrets of love, heartbreak, and redemption. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. Drop your location in the comments. I'm curious which part of the world my viewers are from. Sit back and let me take you on a journey that might just melt your heart tonight. The cold Wyoming wind carried the scent of cedar smoke, horses, and dust when Cole Bennett stepped into the office of the Blackthorn Ranch, expecting nothing more than another day's orders. Instead, he found Walter Calloway standing stiff behind his heavy oak desk, his weathered face tight with tension. The older rancher's gray eyes stayed fixed on the window overlooking the sprawling land, while his fingers tapped slowly against a leather-bound ledger. Something felt wrong immediately. Cole had worked for Calloway for nearly 5 years, and the man was known across Wyoming territory as hard, proud, and impossible to read. He never spoke about personal matters. Never. Yet the silence hanging in the room carried the weight of something far heavier than cattle prices or ranch work. Cole removed his hat slowly. "Sir?" he asked carefully. Walter finally turned around. "Close the door, son." The tone in his voice made Cole uneasy. He pushed the door shut behind him, hearing the latch click like the sound of a trap locking into place. Walter stared at him for a long moment before speaking again. "What I'm about to say ain't easy." Cole remained standing. "If this is about the herd crossing late, I can ride out now and—" Walter lifted a hand sharply. "This ain't business." That alone sent tension crawling through Cole's chest. Walter Calloway was the kind of man who treated emotions like weakness. If he was speaking personally, then whatever came next mattered more than anything else on the ranch. Walter moved toward the window again, watching Cowboy saddle horses in the morning light. "Last week," he said quietly, "that bull would have killed me if you hadn't stepped in." Cole remembered it clearly. A massive black steer had broken loose during branding, charging straight toward Walter. Every ranch hand nearby had frozen, but Cole had grabbed a rope and thrown himself between them without thinking. "You saved my life," Walter continued, "and I settled my debts." Cole shifted uncomfortably. Gratitude from Walter Calloway felt dangerous somehow. "I didn't do it for payment," Cole replied. "Any decent man would have done the same." Walter shook his head slowly. "Most men ain't decent when fear gets hold of 'em." The ranch owner hesitated for the first time in the conversation, and when he spoke again, his voice sounded heavier. "My daughter, Evelyn, she needs a husband." Cole blinked, unsure he had heard correctly. "Sir, she's 24 now," Walter continued, "and I need a man who won't walk away from her." Confusion crashed into Cole, so hard he almost laughed from disbelief. But Walter's face remained deadly serious. "You're marrying her today." The words slammed into the room like thunder. Cole stared at him, stunned silent. For several seconds he couldn't even breathe properly. Marry his daughter? Today? The thought was so sudden, so impossible. His mind struggled to catch up. "Sir," Cole finally said slowly, with respect, "you can't force a man into marriage." Walter's jaw tightened. "I can when it's about protecting my family." Cole had heard the rumors for years. Everyone in the nearby town of Dry Creek talked about Walter Calloway's daughter in whispers. Some claimed she was hideous. Others said she was cursed, strange, touched in the head, unfit to be seen in public. Most folks had never even laid eyes on her, but gossip spread across frontier towns faster than wildfire through dry grass. Walter exhaled heavily. "This town's cruel to her. Always has been." Cole stayed silent. "She needs somebody steady," Walter said. "Somebody honorable. Somebody who won't treat her like the rest of this rotten town does." Cole paced across the office floor, boots thudding against old wood. Marriage wasn't something a man stumbled into because of obligation. It was a lifetime, a future, a responsibility heavier than most people understood. "Why me?" Cole finally asked. For the first time since Cole had known him, Walter's hard expression cracked slightly with exhaustion. "Because you've got decency left in you," he answered quietly. "And because Evelyn trusts almost nobody, but I think she might trust you." That answer hit harder than Cole expected. He rubbed a hand across his jaw, staring at the floor. Every instinct told him to refuse. Yet another part of him couldn't ignore the desperation in Walter's voice. The old rancher, wasn't acting out of pride. He sounded frightened, not for himself, but for his daughter. Hours passed in a blur after that. Before Cole could fully process anything, preparations were already underway. Walter moved with cold determination, arranging the ceremony with mechanical precision. A preacher was summoned. The small church in Dry Creek was prepared. Townsfolk gathered quickly after hearing the news, drawn toward scandal like vultures circling fresh carrion. Cole washed up at the ranch house and changed into his cleanest shirt and black vest. As sunset painted the Wyoming hills gold and crimson, he stood outside the little white church feeling more uncertain than he ever had in his life. He had faced stampedes, blizzards, bar fights, and gunmen without fear. But this unknown future shook him deeply. Inside the church, whispers spread like snakes through tall grass. The scent of old pine wood and candle smoke filled the air, while benches creaked beneath the weight of curious townsfolk. "Poor devil," somebody muttered behind him. "He's really marrying her? Probably ain't even seen her face." Cole clenched his jaw hard enough to ache. These people knew nothing about Evelyn Calloway, yet they spoke about her like she wasn't human at all. The preacher approached quietly. "Son," he said gently, "if you truly don't want this marriage, nobody can force your soul into vows." Cole looked toward the altar for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "I gave my word," he answered quietly. The preacher studied him carefully before stepping away. Moments later, the church doors creaked open. Every whisper stopped instantly. Evelyn Calloway stood framed in the doorway beneath fading evening sunlight. She wore a simple ivory wedding dress, modest and plain, with a long white veil covering her face completely. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, trembling so badly Cole could notice even from across the room. She walked slowly down the aisle like someone marching toward judgment instead of marriage. The silence inside the church grew painfully heavy. Cole watched carefully as she approached. He couldn't see her face beneath the veil, but he noticed everything else. The nervous hitch in her breathing, the way her shoulders curled inward protectively, the fear radiating from every hesitant step. She didn't look like a woman preparing for a wedding. She looked like someone expecting humiliation. Something inside Cole shifted painfully at that realization. When she finally reached the altar beside him, her trembling became even more noticeable. She kept her head lowered, as though avoiding eye contact with everyone around her. Cole cleared his throat softly. "Miss Calloway," he said gently, "I'm Cole." She nodded faintly without lifting her gaze. The preacher began the ceremony, his calm voice echoing through the small church. Yet Cole barely heard the words. His attention stayed fixed on the frightened woman beside him. Not once did she look toward the crowd. Not once did she show anger or bitterness. Only fear. And that fear told Cole more than rumors ever could. When the preacher reached the moment of unveiling, Evelyn stiffened instantly. Her fingers twitched near the edge of her veil before falling again. The church grew so silent Cole could hear the wind outside brushing against the windows. Evelyn's breathing became shaky. Cole leaned slightly closer, so only she could hear him. "It's all right," he whispered gently. "Take your time." For a long moment she didn't move. Then slowly, painfully slowly, her trembling hands lifted the veil. And the moment Cole saw her face, his breath caught completely. She wasn't monstrous. She wasn't hideous. She wasn't cursed. She was beautiful in the saddest, quietest way he had ever seen. A faint scar curved near her temple and down one side of her cheek, pale against soft skin, but it didn't ruin her beauty. If anything, it revealed a story of pain she had somehow survived. Her eyes held uncertainty so deep it nearly hurt to look at. The cruel rumors shattered instantly inside Cole's mind. This woman wasn't ugly. This woman had simply been hurt by a world too cruel to see beyond scars. And suddenly Cole understood. Walter hadn't forced this marriage because his daughter was unwanted. He forced it because the world had failed her. And standing there beneath the fading churchlight, staring into Evelyn's frightened eyes, Cole Bennett realized one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't going anywhere. The church felt smaller after Evelyn lifted her veil. The silence pressing against the walls turned thick and uncomfortable as every person inside stared openly at her face. Some people looked shocked. Others looked almost disappointed, as if they had arrived expecting some terrible creature instead of a wounded young woman. Cole noticed the ugly curiosity in her eyes and felt anger coiled tightly in his chest. For years, these people had whispered about Evelyn Cowboy without ever truly seeing her. Now they looked robbed of their cruel entertainment. Evelyn seemed to notice it too. Her shoulders tightened immediately, and she lowered her gaze toward the wooden floor again as though bracing herself for rejection. Cole hated that instinct in her. Nobody should stand at their own wedding expecting humiliation. A faint breeze slipped through the church windows, stirring the edge of her veil, while candlelight flickered softly against a scar near her temple. Up close, Cole could tell the mark had healed long ago, but the pain behind her eyes had not. He found himself wondering what had happened to her. Who had hurt her badly enough to make an entire town define her by one scar? The preacher cleared his throat awkwardly, glancing between them before continuing the ceremony. But Evelyn suddenly spoke first, her voice barely louder than the rustling wind outside. "I know what folks say about me." The quiet sadness in those words hit harder than shouting ever could. Evelyn swallowed carefully before continuing. "And I know you didn't choose this." Her voice carried no anger, no bitterness, only resignation, like someone who had already accepted disappointment as a permanent part of life. Cole looked at her fully then, studying the fear hidden behind her lowered lashes. She truly believed he pitied her. Worse, she expected him to hate her eventually just like everyone else had. That realization twisted painfully inside him. "Evelyn," he said quietly. She finally glanced up at him, uncertain and guarded. Cole wasn't sure exactly what he wanted to say yet. He only knew he couldn't let her stand there believing she was unwanted. The preacher wisely stepped back a little, pretending to rearrange the pages of his Bible while giving them a moment. Cole lowered his voice further. "I'm not leaving." The words were simple, but the effect they had on Evelyn was immediate. Her breath caught sharply, and her eyes widened with genuine shock. It was the expression of someone hearing something they had stopped believing was possible. Trust, acceptance, kindness. Walter Calloway sat silently in the front pew nearby, his rough hands clenched together tightly. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Cole noticed something beneath the rancher's stern exterior. Fear, not fear for himself. Fear for his daughter's future. Walter wasn't trying to trap Cole out of selfishness. He was desperate to know Evelyn wouldn't face the world alone after he was gone. Cole slowly reached for her hand. At first she flinched slightly, clearly in use a gentle contact. But after a second, her trembling fingers relaxed carefully into his. The warmth of her hand surprised him. So did the strange protective feeling rising steadily inside his chest. The preacher resumed the ceremony quietly, his voice echoing through the church once more. This time Cole listened carefully to every word. Marriage, commitment, loyalty, responsibility. They no longer sounded like chains around his neck. Standing beside Evelyn, they sounded like promises worth making. When the vows began, Evelyn struggled to speak at first. Her voice shook badly enough that several people in the audience exchanged glances. Cole ignored them completely. Every word she managed to say sounded like an act of courage. When it was his turn, Cole answered clearly and firmly, his voice steady enough to quiet even the whispers in the room. He meant every word, not because he had planned this life, but because somewhere between the fear in Evelyn's eyes and the strength hidden beneath her pain, something inside him had changed. Evelyn seemed to hear that sincerity too. As he spoke, some of the tension left her shoulders little by little. The fear didn't vanish entirely, but a fragile spark of hope appeared in her expression, cautious and delicate like the first light before sunrise. The preacher finally smiled faintly before closing his Bible. "By the authority granted to me," he announced warmly, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The church remained strangely quiet afterward. No cheering, no celebration. Only murmurs spreading across the benches as townsfolk struggled to reconcile the ugly rumors with the woman standing before them now. Cole barely noticed any of them. His attention stayed on Evelyn. She lowered the veil again carefully, not to hide ugliness, but to protect herself from the stares still burning into her skin. That small action alone told Cole how deeply years of judgment had scarred her spirit. Without thinking much about it, he rested his hand gently against the small of her back. Evelyn tensed instantly at the touch, then slowly relaxed when she realized he wasn't pushing her away. Together they walked down the aisle and stepped outside into the cold Wyoming evening. The sharp wind hit them immediately, carrying dust across the street, while dark storm clouds gathered beyond the distant mountains. Horses shifted restlessly near the hitching posts, and somewhere far off thunder rumbled softly. For the first time since arriving at the church, they were finally alone. Evelyn stopped near the wooden steps, clutching the edge of her veil tightly. "You don't have to pretend," she whispered without looking at him. Cole frowned slightly. "Pretend what?" "To be kind." The sadness in her voice nearly stopped his heart. She kept staring toward the empty dirt road ahead. "Father told me he asked this of you because he trusts you," she continued softly. "But I know men don't marry women like me willingly." Cole turned toward her fully. "Women like you?" Evelyn hesitated. "Damaged." The word landed between them like a gunshot. Cole stared at her in disbelief. Was that truly how she saw herself? Not as human, not as worthy, only damaged. He shook his head firmly. "Your father gave the order," he admitted. "That's true." Evelyn flinched slightly at the confirmation, but staying, Cole continued carefully. "That part's my choice." She looked up at him immediately, then, startled, Cole finally saw her eyes clearly beneath the fading light. Soft blue filled with uncertainty and years of quiet loneliness. The scar on her face no longer stood out to him at all. What he noticed instead was how carefully she watched people, as though constantly preparing herself for cruelty. He stepped a little closer, keeping his movements slow enough not to frighten her. "I can't fix whatever this town put you through," he said quietly. "But I can promise you this. I won't be another person trying to hurt you." Evelyn's eyes filled instantly with tears she clearly hated showing. She looked away quickly, blinking hard. Nobody had spoken gently to her in a very long time. Cole realized that with painful clarity. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The wind moved through the empty street, while lanterns flickered awake along storefronts nearby. Dry creek carried on around them like any ordinary evening. Yet for Evelyn, everything had changed completely. And strangely enough, for Cole it had changed too. Finally, Evelyn nodded once, slow and uncertain. "All right," she whispered. "IT wasn't trust yet, but it was the beginning of it." Cole offered her his arm carefully. After only the slightest hesitation, she accepted it. Together they walked toward the waiting wagon beneath the darkening Wyoming sky, leaving behind the whispers of judgment, and a church full of people who had never truly known her at all. As thunder rolled across the distant plains, Cole glanced toward the woman beside him and understood something deeply important. This marriage had begun as an obligation, but somewhere along the way, it had already become something far more dangerous, something real. The ride back to Blackthorn Ranch was quiet except for the creaking wagon wheels and the distant rumble of thunder rolling across the Wyoming plains. Darkness settled slowly over the land, covering the hills in deep blue shadows, while cold winds swept across the open fields. Cole held the reins steadily, stealing occasional glances toward Evelyn seated beside him. She remained tense the entire ride. Her hands rested tightly together in her lap, fingers twisting nervously against the fabric of her wedding dress. Every now and then she glanced toward him as if trying to understand whether his kindness was genuine or simply temporary politeness. Cole understood that look. It was the look of someone waiting for disappointment. He hated that she expected it so naturally. The lantern hanging beside the wagon cast soft light across her face whenever the wheels hit bumps in the road. In those moments, he noticed details he hadn't seen clearly inside the church. The exhaustion hidden beneath her eyes, the quiet intelligence in her expression, the sadness she tried so hard to bury beneath silence. Most of all, he noticed how young she seemed despite everything life had already done to her. Neither of them spoke for nearly half the journey. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence softly. "You don't have to stay in the main house." Cole glanced toward her. "What do you mean?" "Father arranged a room for you there," she explained carefully. "But if you'd rather stay with the bunkhouse hands, nobody would blame you." Cole frowned slightly. She was already offering him distance, already expecting rejection. "You're my wife," he answered simply. "I'm not sleeping in the bunkhouse." Evelyn looked surprised again, though she quickly lowered her eyes afterward. "You say things very easily," she murmured. Cole studied her quietly before replying. "No," he said honestly. "I just mean what I say." That answer seemed to affect her more deeply than he expected because she fell silent afterward, staring out toward the dark hills with glistening eyes. Rain began shortly after, not heavy at first. Just a light drizzle tapping against the wagon roof, while lightning flashed faintly in the distance. The storm clouds above the plains thickened quickly, swallowing the moonlight whole. By the time Blackthorn Ranch appeared ahead of them, rain poured steadily across the land. The large ranch house stood glowing warmly against the storm, lanterns burning in nearly every window. Stable hands rushed forward as Cole pulled the wagon to a stop beneath the porch. Walter Calloway stepped outside immediately. For a brief moment his hard expression softened with visible relief when he saw Evelyn safely beside Cole. "You made it back before the worst of it," Walter said over the rain. Cole climbed down first before turning to help Evelyn carefully from the wagon. She hesitated only slightly before placing her hand in his. Walter noticed. Cole saw it in the older man's eyes. Hope, inside the ranch house. Warmth wrapped around them instantly. The scent of burning wood and cooked beef filled the air while rain battered the windows outside. A housekeeper hurried Evelyn upstairs to change from her damp wedding dress, while Walter poured whiskey into 2 glasses near the fireplace. Cole accepted one silently. For several moments neither man spoke. Finally Walter exhaled heavily. "You could still leave if you wanted," he said quietly without looking up. "I'd understand." Cole stared at him carefully. "Would you?" Walter's jaw tightened. "No," he admitted after a moment. "Truth is, I'd hate you for it." At least the old man was honest. Cole took a slow sip of whiskey before speaking. "What happened to her?" Walter went still instantly. The fire crackled loudly between them. Finally the ranch owner sat heavily in a nearby chair, suddenly looking far older than before. "When Evelyn was 16, he said quietly, her mother died during a fire." Cole stayed silent. Walter rubbed tired hands across his face. The upstairs hallway collapsed while Evelyn tried to get her little cousin out. His voice roughened slightly. "She saved the child, but the beam caught part of her face before I could reach her." Cole's chest tightened painfully. "She nearly died," Walter continued, "and after that, folks changed." Anger flickered beneath every word now. People started staring, whispering, acting like one scar erased everything good about her. He looked toward the staircase bitterly. Some men courted her before the accident. Afterward, they wouldn't even look her in the eye. Cole felt sick hearing it. Walter drained the rest of his whiskey harshly. "She stopped leaving the ranch much after that," he admitted. "Stopped trusting people. Can't say I blame her. For the first time, everything finally made sense. The fear, the silence, the way Evelyn expected cruelty before kindness. This town hadn't simply gossiped about her. It had broken something inside her piece by piece." Cole stared into the fire for a long moment before asking quietly, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Walter gave a tired laugh without humor. "Would it have changed anything?" Cole thought carefully about that. "No," he answered honestly. And surprisingly, he meant it. Footsteps sounded softly upstairs. Both men looked up. Evelyn descended the staircase slowly, wearing a pale blue dress, her damp hair now loose around her shoulders, without the veil hiding her face. The scar was more visible beneath the warm lantern light. Yet somehow she looked even more beautiful now. Not because she was flawless, because she was real. Evelyn hesitated near the bottom step. When she noticed both men watching her, Walter quickly stood. "You should eat something." She nodded faintly. Dinner passed quietly at first. Rain hammered against the windows while thunder rolled over the plains outside. The long dining table felt too large for only 3 people. Yet Cole noticed something important throughout the meal. Every time Evelyn spoke, she apologized first. "Sorry, could you pass the bread?" "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." "Sorry." The word followed nearly everything she said, as though existing itself required forgiveness. By the end of dinner, it bothered Cole more than he expected. When Walter eventually retired upstairs, claiming exhaustion from the long day, silence settled between Cole and Evelyn once more. She began gathering plates automatically. "You don't have to do that," Cole said. "I always help Martha after supper. she replied quietly. Cole stood from his chair. Then I'll help too. That clearly surprised her. You don't have to, she insisted softly. Neither do you. For a second, Evelyn looked almost uncertain how to respond. Then finally, very faintly, she smiled. It was small, brief, fragile, but it transformed her entire face. And for the first time all evening, Cole found himself smiling too. Together they cleaned the kitchen quietly while rainstorm winds rattled the windows outside. The moment felt strangely peaceful despite how unnatural this entire marriage still was. Afterward, Evelyn paused near the staircase again, nervousness returning to her expression. There are separate bedrooms prepared, she said carefully. I thought perhaps you prefer that. Cole studied her face for a moment. She wasn't rejecting him. She was trying to protect him from discomfort. That realization mattered deeply. We don't have to decide everything tonight, he answered gently. Relief flashed across her face, so quickly it nearly hurt to witness. Thank you, she whispered. Cole nodded once. As Evelyn turned toward the staircase, she suddenly stopped midway and looked back at him. Why are you being kind to me? The question caught him completely off guard. Not because he lacked an answer, because she genuinely didn't understand why anyone would. Cole leaned lightly against the doorway, thinking carefully before speaking. Because somebody should have been a long time ago. Evelyn stared at him silently. Then without another word, she disappeared upstairs. Cole remained standing alone in the quiet kitchen long after she left, listening to the storm outside and realizing something dangerous was happening inside his chest. This arrangement was supposed to be temporary obligation, simple duty, nothing more. But already he found himself caring what Evelyn thought, caring whether she smiled, caring whether she hurt. And deep down, Cole Bennett knew one hard truth about men like him. Once his heart decided to protect something, it never let go easily. Over the next few weeks, life at Blackthorn Ranch slowly settled into a routine neither Cole nor Evelyn expected. The mornings were filled with ranch work, long cattle drives, and repairing fences damaged by spring storms. But no matter how exhausting the days became, Cole always found himself looking toward the ranch house before sunset, wondering if Evelyn would be waiting on the porch. And most evenings, she was. At first, their conversation stayed careful and short. Evelyn still carried years of fear inside her, and sometimes she pulled away whenever kindness felt too unfamiliar. But little by little, she began trusting him. She laughed more too, not loudly, but softly, like someone rediscovering a forgotten part of herself. The town, however, remained cruel. Whenever Evelyn visited Dry Creek for supplies, whispers followed her through the streets. Women stared. Men muttered behind saloon doors. One afternoon outside the general store, a ranch hand named Earl Dawson laughed openly when Evelyn passed. Calloway finally bought himself a husband for the scarred girl, he sneered. The words had barely left his mouth before Cole grabbed him by the collar and slammed him hard against the wooden wall beside the store. You speak about my wife like that again, Cole said coldly, and you'll be picking your teeth out of the dirt. The street went silent instantly. Earl nodded quickly, fear replacing his arrogance. Cole released him and turned toward Evelyn. She looked stunned, not by the anger, but by the fact someone had offended her publicly for the first time in years. That night back at the ranch, Evelyn stood quietly beside the porch railing while lantern light flickered around them. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. Cole leaned against the post beside her. Yes, I did. She looked down at her hands. Most people usually agree with them. Cole's expression hardened slightly. Most people are cowards. For a long moment, Evelyn said nothing. Then finally she looked up at him, eyes shining softly in the darkness. You really mean it when you say you're staying, don't you? Cole stepped closer carefully. I married you, Evelyn, he said quietly. That means something to me. The emotion in her face nearly undid him. Weeks earlier, she had looked at him with fear and uncertainty. Now, for the first time, Cole saw something warmer growing there. Trust, maybe even love. Then one evening, everything changed. A rider arrived at Blackthorn Ranch carrying terrible news. Walter Calloway's business partner had betrayed him, stealing money and legal papers connected to part of the ranch land. If the documents weren't recovered quickly, Blackthorn Ranch could be lost entirely. Walter looked 20 years older after hearing the news. But before Cole could speak, Evelyn stepped forward calmly. "I know where he went," she said. Both men stared at her in surprise. Evelyn took a slow breath. "I overheard him speaking before he disappeared. He mentioned heading south toward Carson Ridge." Walter looked shocked. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" Evelyn hesitated painfully. "Because nobody ever listens when I speak." The silence after those words cut deeper than any knife. Cole immediately grabbed his hat and rifle. "Well," he said firmly, "I'm listening now." And as Evelyn looked at him standing beside her without hesitation, she realized something she never thought possible. For the first time in her life, she wasn't facing the world alone anymore. Before sunrise the next morning, Cole rode out toward Carson Ridge with 2 trusted ranch hands beside him. The trail was rough and dangerous, cutting through rocky hills and narrow canyons, but Evelyn's information proved right. By nightfall, they found Walter Calloway's former partner hiding in an abandoned mining cabin with the stolen papers and money packed for escape. The man tried to run. Cole stopped him with a single warning shot fired into the dirt near his boots. "You stole from the wrong family," Cole said coldly. By the time they returned to Blackthorn Ranch 2 days later, the ranch was saved. Walter could barely speak when Cole handed him the recovered documents. The old rancher looked toward Evelyn then, guilt heavy in his eyes. "All these years," he said quietly, "I protected you from the world, but I never realized I was also teaching you to stay silent." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. Walter stepped forward and held her tightly for the first time in years. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." The moment nearly broke Cole's heart to witness. News of what happened spread quickly through Dry Creek. Slowly, the whispers about Evelyn began changing. People who once mocked her now spoke with respect, not because of her scar, but because of her strength and courage. But none of that mattered much to Evelyn anymore, because she finally had something far more valuable than the town's approval. She had someone who truly saw her. One quiet evening several weeks later, Evelyn sat beside Cole on the ranch porch while the Wyoming sunset painted the plains gold and amber. The air smelled of horses, cedar smoke, and fresh rain. "You know," she said softly, "when I walked into that church, I thought my life was ending." Cole smiled faintly beside her. "And now," Evelyn looked at him, her eyes warm and steady. "Now I think it was finally beginning." Cole reached for her hand, lacing his fingers gently through hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply sat together watching the endless western horizon stretch beneath the fading light. 2 wounded souls, 2 lonely hearts. And somehow, against all odds, they have found home in each other. I love all of you, my wonderful audience of Wild West Tales. Tell me how this story made you feel. Leave a comment below. Type 1 if you love this story. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more epic tales from the wild.